Hello and welcome back to the Anecdotalist, episode 10. I'm your host, Paul Packard, and with me, as always, my co host, Jason McKinney.
How's it going, everybody?
Tonight is special for us because we've reached a milestone, episode 10. I have to say, this has absolutely flown by, and we've had our fair share of ups and downs, but we made it. I wasn't sure if we'd ever see episode 10, but we're here and we're excited.
Yeah, so I cannot believe that this is the 10th episode, man. I feel a little anxious every time that we do this, but at the same time, I'm always excited to hear like whatever story you have. The fact that this has flown by, I feel like should say how much fun we've had doing this?
Yeah, I agree. It's been a blast that we've been able to sit down and do so many different stories. It is interesting because the time does just fly by, and all of a sudden I'm realizing, hey, I got to get this outline finished because we got to record by this date so I can have it edited and out by this date. And with our busy lives and everything going on, sometimes it's hard, but we're at the point now where we feel like we've done this enough that we feel comfortable as we go through it.
And you know what's funny is I feel so bad because I know you're doing a majority of the work here. Like literally, I don't think everybody understands. Paul does everything. I literally get to sit here and just listen to Paul go on. And I feel so guilty sometimes because he works a full-time job. He's got kids. I don't have kids yet. And he's just like busting these episodes out. Like he loves it.
Yeah, I think that's part of it too, is that I've always wanted it that way. I like having full control. And people, if you're jumping in on episode 10 here, the first couple episodes when we did our beta launch test, that was the intent of this. Jason lives miles and miles away, several states away. Part of this is kind of staying in touch with each other and sitting down and having a project that we're working on together. But the other part of it is I've always wanted to do this. I've always had that push to like put together a podcast. Having someone like Jason to sit down with me, to stop me and pause me along the way and ask questions along the way, just makes it feel that much more comfortable as we go through it, as opposed to me sounding like a robot running through a bunch of information. So, all that said, for our 10th episode tonight, we do have an unsolved mystery, and we'll be talking about the Circleville Letters. And keeping with the advice we've received in the past, the attempt now is to keep this brief and jump right into the story. So, Jason, if you're ready, here we go. Okay, so the Circleville Letters. This is a super interesting one, and I was a little concerned that there wouldn't be enough meat on the bone here for a full episode. But after digging in, there's plenty here to talk about, and I'm sure our listeners may be happier with an episode that is all encompassing and not broken up into two parts.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of our episodes I feel like have been pretty long.
Yeah. So Circleville is a small town in southern Ohio. It's about 30 minutes south of Columbus for reference, and only has a population of about 13,000 people. And so when you think small town Ohio, Circleville fits those descriptions. So this all starts in 1976 or 1977 when people in the town of Circleville start receiving anonymous letters postmarked from Columbus, Ohio. So most of the sources focus in on one family in particular, and I think that's why there's a discrepancy in the year, because a woman by the name of Mary Gillespie, she receives her letter in 1977, but other people did receive a lot of letters. I did read multiple sources. Most of them say 1977, but a couple said 1976 for some reason. So 1977, for all intents and purposes, is when the first letter shows up.
So, I'm sitting here like thinking, oh, it's Ohio. Cool. There's another, we got another story close to home. But 1976, 1977. I don't think I go back that far.
Yeah, there does seem to be quite a bit of things happening in Ohio for some reason. But so a quick little background on Mary. So she's a school bus driver for the Westfall School District, and her kids go to school there as well. So her and her husband Ron, they're not new to the town, and it's a pretty small town, so everyone kind of knows everyone. And the Gillespies aren't outsiders; They actually went to high school together, Ron and Mary, and they were high school sweethearts. They just think about, again, a town of 13,000 people. This couple went to high school there. They lived there. They have family. They have kids there. She drives a school bus. They are really ingrained in this town.
13,000 people is not even a drop in the bucket.
Yeah, that's the thing, is that when it comes to small towns, like classic, like a Stephen King novel, small town, this is that picturesque small town. You got to travel to get there. It's a small little downtown area. You got only 13,000 people living there. It's pretty small. One quick thing to also note, so working for the school district is a man by the name of Gordon Massey. So he's the superintendent of this district. And the letters revolve around these two people in particular. And that's what mostly we're going to be covering tonight. There's a lot of other letters that go out, but the main story kind of focuses in on Gordon Massey and Mary Gillespie. So again, Mary receives that letter in 1977. And what I think we should do here is, I'm going to read her first letter. And then from there, we're not really going to dive into the letters. There's just so many of them. And I don't want this to be like a reading one letter after another. I just want to tell the story. So I'm going to read this first letter. And then from here on, I'm not really going to quote any more letters after this. So the first letter goes, quote, Mrs. Gillespie, stay away from Massey. Don't lie when questioned about meeting him. I know where you live. I've been observing your house and know you have children. This is no joke. Please take it serious. Everyone concerned has been notified that everything will be over soon. End quote.
Man, that's kind of a scary letter to be getting. Like a random letter popping up in your mailbox. It's kind of scary when you bring kids into it. And this letter has so much seriousness, such a thick air to it.
Yeah. And again, there's like thousands of these letters that got mailed, and they're all pretty aggressive. When you look into this, when you read articles, I watched 48 Hours on this, I watched the Unsolved Mysteries on this, and one thing that comes up time and time again is that as time went on, these letters get more and more like deranged and crazy. These letters are on file at Pickaway County Sheriff's Office, and this first letter I just read can basically be read anywhere. Any article that has a story has this first letter. But yeah, they're pretty serious, and then as time goes on, they get kind of more and more serious and more deranged, and kind of scary.
Man, so obviously, I guess after receiving a letter like this, she's on full alert, locking doors at night, warning the kids, warning the husband. That's the only response that you would go through on a letter like this.
I kind of was thinking that too, and what's funny is she keeps this to herself. 8 days go by, and she gets another letter. This one specifically talks about her kids and knowing where they go to school, and that if she doesn't come out about the affair, that the writer was going to kill one of her kids. The way I just said it is a little bit more tame than how the letter was written. She keeps the first one to herself, doesn't tell her husband, doesn't tell anybody. 8 days go by, a second letter comes in, and it's very aggressive.
Oh my gosh. Okay. Well, then you just straight up ignore a letter that's threatening you and your kids. And then you get another letter actually threatening to kill her kids. That's time to bring in the cops, right?
Yeah, you would think. So that she ignores this one as well, which I think is kind of interesting. If I got a letter detailing what my house looked like, the ages of my kid, and where they go to school, I'd probably tell people about this. And unless maybe she was having like an affair and just didn't want this to get out. So maybe think of it through that lens. Like the letter calls her out and she's thinking, I gotta just ignore this. Maybe it'll go away because she is having an affair or something.
Okay. Well, even if you're having an affair, like your kids just receive a death threat, would you let that go? Wouldn't you at least, even if you're having an affair, I'd still tell the cops and be like, I'd come clean, try to save the kids.
Yeah, come clean or like try to get ahead of it or something. But she doesn't. So after not doing anything, her husband gets a letter. So Ron gets a letter, which now that I'm thinking about it, don't they have the same mailbox? Is Ron just like, hey, honey, you have a letter. It has no return address and it has this weird handwriting on it. It's addressed to you. Oh, you have another one. Oh, now I have one. Like she was hiding her letters from him and then saw one that looked the same as hers, but didn't hide that too. You know what I mean? If she's like ignoring those letters, hiding them, acting like she's not getting them, and then he has one addressed to him, like, does she go out and collect the mail? Wouldn't she have seen that letter? So Ron gets his letter, And it's all kind of the same stuff. Hey, your wife Mary, she's cheating on you with Massey. You need to do something about this. It also says if you don't do anything about this, your life is going to be in danger. So basically, this letter, first letter he gets, it threatens him if he doesn't say or do anything about this affair that's happening.
Okay, in any normal situation, if you tell somebody's spouse that they're getting cheated on, you don't normally have to put a death threat in that same letter. Normally, just saying you're getting cheated on is enough to put someone on edge and for someone to do something about it.
Yeah, you'd think. So Mary actually denies the affair, and they get another letter. This one saying, if you don't do anything, I'm going to broadcast this everywhere, and everyone will know what's going on here. So Mary and Ron, they sit down with Ron's sister and her husband, Paul Freshour, and Mary tells Paul, hey, I think I know who this is, and they decide that Paul should write the letter to this mystery person to get them to stop.
I wouldn't be writing the letter to them. I'd be going and talking to the person. Like, if you know who it is, just go to them.
Yeah, it's super weird because this happens throughout this story, and I'm going to get into this in a second, but this comes up again. That's just kind of odd. And so it's also kind of confusing here because different sources claim different things here. And so in one source, the claim is that Mary tells Paul, who they believe they know who is sending the letters, that they have Paul write letters to the mystery person and the letters stop for a couple weeks. Another source claims that they believe the writer is actually Paul Freshour and that they themselves write letters to Paul anonymously saying they know it's him, etc., and the letters stop. Which I don't know why there's that discrepancy. Most sources, though, again, even the Unsolved Mysteries source specifically talk about how they all sat down and Paul wrote the letter. But I think it's just this one source that had some weird information that was different than all the other ones. And that's in the show notes. You can look at all the different sources we have here. But there was a little bit of a discrepancy there where they acted as if they knew it was Paul from the start, but then most of the other sources say it's not. They didn't think that, and Paul was the one that actually penned the letters to the person they thought it was. And again, these all stopped for about 2 weeks. But all that said, like all of this kind of hinges on this guy, Paul. But it's really not that simple that it's just him. And we'll get into like a little bit more here in a second. Okay, so they finally contact the police and they're basically meh, I don't know. And so Ron, Mary's husband, just won't let it go. And he's doing all that he can to find this person. So he goes as far as confronting Gordon Massey. And so he, of course, denies the affair and also claims that he's getting the same letters mailed to him as well.
What would you do if you got letters saying, hey, your wife is cheating on you, and you actually felt like you knew who it was? What would you do personally?
Well, you sit down with your spouse first, I would assume. That's what I would do at least and talk through it. The letter thing is weird because it's just such a random thing to have happen. Someone's claiming they know something and it's anonymous. That kind of adds like a little level. It's like someone nowadays without, because you don't really get handwritten letters anymore. I feel like that's someone out of the blue message you on Facebook saying, hey, just to let you know, I wanted to inform you that I saw your wife doing XYZ. I think that's the equivalent, and that's hard to be. There's not really an anonymous way to do that. I don't know, but I mean, I get it. He confronts Gordon Massey after all this and asks him what's going on, and Massey denies the affair. I think, like in a small town like this, again, everyone knows everyone, so I don't know.
Yeah, see, my thought process is if I got a letter saying, hey, your wife is cheating on you and you need to do something about it. And first off, there's a death threat in there. So my first thought is I'm going to the cops. Death threat you don't mess with, small town or not, prank or not, there's a death threat involved. We need to go ahead and escalate this.
Yeah,
And then second, I'm gonna go and I'm gonna have a chat with the guy that had the affair.
yeah, and that's what happens here. I mean, they do get the police involved here, and he does confront Gordon. Or he does confront Massey.
I mean, it seems like they were kind of ignoring it for a while.
At first, it does seem that way, and most sources I read, it seemed like they kind of just were doing their own thing at first, but they do get the police involved. I'm not sure how long it took them to do that. It seems like from reading and watching all the different material that's out there, it seemed like it didn't take them longer to get the police involved, but they eventually do. And he does confront Gordon Massey as well. It is very interesting. It does feel like kind of disjointed though. I felt that way as I was like reading through it because I'm like, when do they talk to the police about this? Because the police do get involved. I had like 8 sources pulled up on my computer, and I'm like, where the heck is this? When do they get involved with the police?
I bet it's like more of like a if it's a small town, everybody knows everybody kind of town. I wonder if this is a situation in which the sheriff is like somebody they go to church with or they see at the grocery store every day. They can just like kind of go up and have a casual conversation, be like, "Yeah, I've been getting these weird letters." And they can kind of outside of being the law, they can kind of give advice on how to approach the situation.
Yeah, I was wondering that myself. I kind of thought like when you think small town, you assume that the sheriff is a friend of the family. If it's such a small town, they would be bumping into the sheriff in everyday life, I would assume. And maybe that's how it happened. Okay, so these letters have been silent for a couple weeks at this point. And one night while Mary is out, she's in Florida actually, or on her way to Florida for like some kind of trip. And so Ron's at home. Ron gets a phone call, and it's the writer of these letters. He has this conversation on the phone, doesn't say who it is. I think his daughter was there, but he knows who this person is. He grabs his gun and just runs out the door. He's going to go after this guy, jumps in his truck, and takes off.
So here's my real quick question. How do we know he's going after the writer and not after Mary?
No, she's on vacation with like another woman, and he specifically says he's going after the writer. He tells his daughter he's going after the writer.
Oh, okay. So he specifically says this. Okay.
Yeah, yeah. Almost immediately, like right down the street, Ron crashes his truck and basically is killed on impact. So the presumption is that he was forced off the road. Maybe it was an accident. We don't really know at this point. It ends up being ruled an accident. However, upon investigation, it's found that Ron, before he crashed, had fired his gun at least one time.
Oh my gosh, so many red flags.
Yeah. So it's very interesting, and we're going to kind of dive a little bit deeper into this. So Ron leaves in a hurry. He grabs his gun, crashes very quickly, dies immediately, and his gun has been fired at least once, which makes you kind of think like, okay, did he shoot at somebody? Like, why was his gun discharged?
Yeah, this is like a whole there should definitely be a scene here. Yellow tape.
More, yes, like a full investigation. And this is the 70s again, so keep that in mind. But it is really interesting because you're like, okay, these letters were threatening Ron's life. They were threatening Ron's family. He goes after whoever this person is after a phone call and dies almost immediately. Because then the other question is, if this person is calling him, how close are they? They don't have cell phones in the 70s. Was he at a payphone? Did he call? Like, what exactly happened? It's very interesting. The sheriff, Dwight Radcliffe, he rules Ron's death an accident as a result of drunk driving. So the toxicology comes back, and Ron's blood alcohol is 0.16. So he was like severely inebriated. And that makes sense, right? Like Ron was super drunk. He gets a phone call. In his excitement, he crashes his truck and he's killed.
Yeah, I mean that does kind of make some sense. What's the normal alcohol limit for drinking? Do you know? Is it like 0.08?
It's 0.08 now, I think, but at the time, it says that 0.16 is 1.5 times the legal limit, which would mean it's not 0.08 at this time, but it's 0.08 right now. But to get to 0.16, that's like 8 beers.
Ooh. Yeah.
Yeah.
Bad time to go kill somebody.
Yeah. But this would make sense, but like that's a lot of beers for him to be just absolutely drunk. And according to like his friends and family, they were like extremely surprised by the toxicology because Ryan wasn't known to be a heavy drinker. That wasn't something. And what's interesting is if his daughter was there, she could testify whether or not he was drinking, but that's never talked about. Family and friends said, "Well, that's super surprising. We don't know Ron as like a heavy drinker."
Definitely another red flag.
Yeah, weird.
How old's his daughter?
I am not sure actually. They're in middle school, 10, 11, 12, maybe. Right in there.
So old enough to understand.
Yeah, old enough to understand. So soon people of Circleville, they start receiving anonymous letters that claimed Sheriff Radcliffe was actually involved in a cover-up. He had originally ruled the accident suspicious or the result of foul play. And I mean, Ron did fire his gun at some point before the crash, but then Radcliffe, for whatever reason, he decides to rule it as an accident after initially saying it possibly is the result of foul play.
Oh wow, that is very very strange. I don't know, man. I know that sometimes I don't know they feel like they can't figure out what exactly the reason is, so they kind of just write it off as like an accident. You know, especially if you're driving a car when you're drunk. I can kind of see you letting a gun off.
Yeah. So you're right. I mean, that was my other thought too. Was if he's extremely inebriated, he's driving. Maybe he saw something. He shot his firearm, and he crashes. And so, yeah, I mean, as a sheriff, maybe you think, oh, okay, this is closing. This is open and shut. This guy's absolutely drunk. He's driving too fast. The gun thing is a little weird, but how weird is it? He's super drunk. That was part of it. But also the other side of it is, what if this is some kind of cover up?
That kind of makes more sense.
Yeah.
He's going out to, Ron goes out to find the guy and get revenge. Coincidence that, the sheriff finds him, and all of a sudden, what could be a homicide now turns into an accident.
Yeah. The sheriff, well, two things. First, the sheriff has an incentive to kind of clean this up, and we'll talk about that here in a moment. But the other thing too is that it's also the path of least resistance. If we think about what's going on, it's easier to rule it an accident. But one thing I thought about too is, what if like the sheriff, if everyone in town is receiving letters, what if the sheriff was receiving letters and he was coerced by the letter writer? Maybe he was blackmailed or something. But that was my thought too. I was like, okay, if everyone's in town is receiving these letters, what if the sheriff was also getting letters? And he was coerced to be like, "Hey, this is actually an accident." But as we go further, I don't think it's that, because the letter writer starts saying, "Hey, Sheriff Radcliffe, he's covering something up."
Yeah, unless this guy just like wants whoever's the letter writer, unless he just wants like a lot of drama. Like, hey officer, this really is an accident, and then like tell everybody else, oh, the sheriff's covering something up, like just to watch the whole world burn.
Yeah, that could easily be the case. So Paul starts really putting pressure on the police to investigate this further, and then beyond this, the letters are start coming in at like a greater pace to people in the town, even to people that hadn't received letters prior to this, all pointing back to the truck accident, claiming there was more to this accident than a drunk driver just crashing into a tree.
I wonder if this is like a situation where you have copycat letter writers, if there are more and more coming.
I kind of wondered that too. These letters get looked at by a lot of different investigators, and they get poured over, and they mostly all line up with the same handwriting. But I did kind of wonder that too. Like, what if you have copycat writers? I mean, think back to the Alcatraz episode when the warden was getting letters after the fact. Like, ha ha ha, we made it. Do you remember that letter? That could easily have been forged as well. So letters can be forged, but the sheer volume of these letters and how they all kind of look the same, I think rules that out. And so, I mean, that's that. So Ron's dead at this point. Letters are still coming, and now it seems like Sheriff Radcliffe, maybe he has something to do with this accident. So some time passes, and in 1983, Mary goes public with a relationship with the superintendent, Massey. So they claim they got the letters and everything, and they got together after the letters, and there wasn't an affair, and she got together after she was widowed. But at this point, the letters get like super vicious and frequent. And in addition to this, signs start popping up along Mary's bus route claiming her affair with the superintendent.
So this kind of makes me think like, okay, now the whole town sees that they're together, and now they're like, they got all these letters talking about this. So now the whole town's against it, Now the whole town is putting up signs. All these high schoolers, instead of egging someone's car, now they're out putting signs talking about this affair.
Yeah, I kind of wondered that too. Like, but I think all the signs have the same kind of block lettering that the letters do. Yeah, maybe there were some like hijinks from the high schoolers. I don't know, but most of it, I think, has to tie back to the letter writer. Once this is all kind of out in public, apparently Paul's like pretty mad about this, because his brother-in-law Ron, who he's close with, his wife is sleeping with the superintendent, who their original claim was cheating on him with the superintendent. So it's kind of like people are upset about this, that this has come out, because now you're thinking, all right, okay, was the letter writer correct about all this? But at some point, Mary goes out and she goes to like retrieve these signs. And she pulls off, she's driving her bus, she pulls off, goes to rip this sign down. And when she does, there's like this string attached to the sign, and it's attached to a box. And she pulls the box down and goes home and with the box, and she opens the box, and there's a pistol inside with a string wrapped around the trigger. It's basically a booby trap, and it was supposed to go off when she pulled the sign down, but it didn't. It was a booby trap box on the sign, which is basically a huge escalation from everything that's happened up until this point.
Was there something on this sign specifically that made her want to pull it up? I mean, if there's multiple signs and then there's this one sign, obviously I think there was something that had to be on it that drew her attention to pull that sign out, whether there might be some truth or something that nobody else knew.
Yeah,
Something on this sign caused her to pull that one up specifically.
yeah, that's a really good question. I didn't really put this down in the outline, but it had to do something with her daughter, I think. It was like a very vulgar. On the 48 Hours episode, they show it and it's like blurred out. It was pretty vulgar in regard to like her daughter or something. So she was like pretty upset about it and wants to take it down.
Oh, so someone knew exactly what to say.
Yeah, to make her pretty upset. The police, I mean, obviously the police are involved with this. They investigate the gun and they're able to lift the serial number off the gun. And it looks like someone tried to file off the serial number, but they didn't do the best job of it. They just got some of the numbers off. Like it wasn't fully scraped off. And they were able to trace the gun back to Paul Freshour.
Wow. So honestly, it sounds like this Paul Freshour is just a really, really jealous guy. I mean, not only jealous, I know you said that it was his brother in law that ended up going off the road and wrecking his car, but it kind of sounds like this guy's got more than an issue. I mean, this is none of his business, but he is going way out of his way to, going as far as trying to kill the person that had this affair. Like, man.
Yeah. At face value, it appears that way. But when you think about it, if you're going to booby trap a sign, are you going to use one, your own gun? Or two, if you know enough about firearms that you're going to file off a serial number, won't you do a thorough job? Wouldn't you actually file the number off and not just leave some numbers?
Oh, so you're thinking that he was set up.
That's possible. That's actually one of our theories, and we're going to get into it here in a bit. But yeah, it's either A, he was really upset and it escalated to the point where he booby trapped a sign to shoot Mary, or B, the gun was stolen and he was framed.
Man, this is getting more and more interesting as we go.
Yeah. And so the really interesting thing is that Paul was actually in the process of divorcing his wife, so Ron's sister at this point. And so Sheriff Radcliffe, they have the serial number. It leads back to Paul, and he investigates, and he finds that Paul actually had called off the day of the booby trap. And so he sits down with Paul and has him write out a letter, kind of in similar handwriting to the one that they had on file. And he interviews him, and he ends up charging him with attempted murder of Mary Gillespie.
Finally. So now all the letters are going to stop.
You would assume. So he's never actually charged with writing the letters. He's just charged with the attempted murder of Mary. And so he actually has an alibi for the day of the attempted murder, but it's not good enough because he is sentenced to 24 years in prison.
Do you know what his alibi was?
Yeah, his alibi, he was having work done on his house. And we get into it here a little bit later, but he was at his house for most of the day because the people that were working on his house were there to say, yeah, he was here most of the day. So you would think at this point, yeah, the letters would stop, but they continue. So Paul's in prison, and he's even at some points, he's in solitary confinement, and these letters just keep coming. And he actually even receives a letter, and in the letter, he's being mocked that he had taken the fall for a crime he didn't commit.
Oh, man, kick a guy while he's down.
Yeah, seriously. So there's a lot of criticism to how the investigation took place. So supposedly the handwriting test was facilitated improperly. There was evidence that he might not be the guy. There was other suspects, and more importantly, Paul had a pretty solid alibi. So despite all of this, he was sent away anyways. So he was paroled in 1994 after serving 10 years in prison.
10 years for evidence that's not that great is not, man.
Right. And one of the things that I find interesting is there's some interviews. If you watch the 48 Hours episode, a couple of the guys on there they interview talk about how they were there during the trial and they kind of watched the whole thing play out. And at the end of it, they're like, "Oh, this guy, there's no way this guy gets convicted," and then he gets convicted. Like the town had just like decided that he was guilty, and the jury was made up of people from the town, and he was convicted. But in a normal court, the way that it's portrayed is that there just really was not enough evidence to put this guy away, but he was. There have been like a lot of investigations of this mystery, and there's a ton of sources out there. There's actually surprisingly isn't a whole lot of nuance from source to source. There is that one source I talked about earlier that has kind of some random different things in it, but a lot of it is pretty much like verbatim from source to source. But I want to zero in on some things here. So, Unsolved Mysteries, they did an episode in 1994, so right when Paul gets out of prison. So, they decide they're coming to town to film an episode. And before they come out, they themselves receive a letter basically saying, don't come out here and don't implicate Sheriff Radcliffe. So, of course, they ignore this and they come out anyway. They interview some people in town, and apparently, Karen Sue, Paul's wife or ex wife, was not a fan of them coming to town and doing this episode. And Paul actually sits down and does like a full interview with them. You can watch the episode and he talks through the episode.
That's kind of a red flag.
Both Unsolved Mysteries and 48 Hours, they talk about this case, and it gets really interesting because I guess Karen Sue, according to the 48 Hours episode, she set up outside of where the Unsolved Mysteries was being filmed and where they were filming the interviews, and she kind of like was in her car and she staked out all day and was writing down, making note of all the people that came in into the interviews with Unsolved Mysteries, which is like super weird that Paul's ex-wife stakes out across the street while Unsolved Mysteries is in town, and she's like making note of all the people that were coming and going, which just kind of rubs me the wrong way, I guess.
Yeah, it sounds like this town, you don't really have any privacy.
No, no, it doesn't seem that way at all.
It kind of seems so typical of her name being Karen.
I know, I thought that too.
We have no discrimination against Karen.
No, I'm sure there are plenty of lovely Karens out there.
We're just saying that you don't need to watch everybody that walks around. You don't need to write it down, what they're doing.
So I guess this kind of leads us into our first theory. So our first theory is that Paul Freshour was set up by his wife, Karen Sue. So according to interviews done during the 48 Hours episode, Karen and Paul were going through a divorce. And when this all was taking place, the claim is that Paul had like a really good divorce lawyer and was pretty much getting everything, the house, the money, the kids, all of it. So Karen at this point is living on Mary's property. And when this booby trap is discovered and the investigators start poking around, they talk to Karen Sue, again, who is living on Mary's property because she's lost the house to Paul. She basically says, Paul is the letter writer. He's been acting suspicious. I found some of the letters he wrote. It was him. And what's really crazy to me about all this is that it was all circumstantial. They didn't have any evidence to back this up. Supposedly, she had thrown the letters away. All they had was her word claiming that it was Paul. And when Paul goes to jail, surprise, surprise, she gets everything. The house, the money, the kids, all of it. Because he goes to jail as they're going through this divorce.
Okay, so what you're saying is you can go ahead and frame your spouse while you're going through a divorce. You can sit there and say that your spouse is a murderer and writing all these letters and get him sent to jail. And then all of a sudden, you get everything from the divorce.
Yeah, that's basically what happened. I know, it's terrible. The claim kind of later becomes, I guess, Paul's son, Mark, supposedly, at this point, we're going to be just kind of speculating a little bit. These are theories, but the theory continues that Mark stole the gun and they created this booby trap. They did a partial scrape off of the serial number and they set him up. And what's crazy is that Mark, his son, goes on to eventually ends up killing himself years later from depression. And some kind of point to the fact that he's just been living with guilt all his life for sending his dad to prison. So to further bring this home, a guy by the name of Martin Yance, someone who has done like extensive research into this case, he's also featured on the 48 Hours episode. He uncovers even more information, and this stuff was left out of the trial. So supposedly, the day of the booby trap, another bus driver, about 20 minutes before Mary was passing through and finds the booby trap, she noticed a suspicious man standing next to an El Camino on the side of the road at the intersection where the sign was found. He was like tall with sandy blonde hair, and Paul is kind of shorter and stockier and has dark hair. The bus driver said that as she was driving by and she looked at him, the guy turned and like acted as if he was peeing, I guess. So she didn't get a good description of him, but that's supposedly what he did. They never really investigated this. It was just like this other bus driver mentioned that, but it was just kind of ignored during the trial. So in the 48 Hours episode, they try to go a little bit further and claim that this was actually the new boyfriend of Karen or her brother, because her brother, I guess, has an El Camino. Again, it's all circumstantial, but it's enough to make you kind of stop and think, why didn't they pursue this further?
Yeah, it kind of doesn't make sense because it almost makes it look as if now Karen set up the trap, or Karen's brother set up this trap.
Yeah, it kind of points to Karen framing Paul at this point. So at this point, we have kind of theory 1.5 or theory 1.5, which basically is not only was Paul set up, but the sheriff's department either A, botched the investigation, or B, intentionally cleaned things up really nicely and used Paul as an easy out to promote Sheriff Radcliffe to becoming the National Sheriff's Association president. And so there's quite a bit here on this, and I'm not going to go through all of it, but basically, after Paul gets out of prison, he writes a letter to the FBI. He pursues the FBI. He wants them to investigate all this stuff. And his letter to the FBI is 164 pages long. He basically writes them a book, and it's a lot. And so, again, we're not going to go through all this because it kind of rambles in some places, but the main point is that Paul basically says and claims that Sheriff Radcliffe essentially is pursuing this position, and the crime rate in Pickaway County is low. However, the letters implicate like a ton of crime, so it was in his benefit to wrap it up quickly and pin this on someone as to make his promotion easier. So this document, he requested the FBI investigate the letters and investigate Radcliffe. He claims that the Department of Corrections confirmed that it was impossible for him to send these letters over the 10-year period. He claims that Radcliffe lied to the media and others, saying that Paul was having his letters smuggled out of prison, which, according to the Department of Corrections, was not true. So he basically just builds a case that Radcliffe used his power to hide and lie and cover up. Apparently, the superintendent during this time was going through a divorce as well. And somehow, for whatever reason, Radcliffe hides this from the media. He also claimed that during his trial, there was evidence that was presented, but was only made available to the prosecutors, but not made available to the defense. And so the implication is that the trial was rigged against him. And that's a lot, but it's really important to keep in mind because you kind of almost think that if Paul was set up, say his wife set him up, and then the sheriff was like, all right, let's wrap this up quickly. This is an easy out. So it's kind of like worst case scenario. A, you're set up. B, the sheriff department is like, oh, it's an easy out. Let's go with this guy.
Yeah, I mean, it makes sense that he would go to the FBI. I mean, obviously they're above the sheriff department, and they'd be able to get more information out of this.
Yeah, at this point, it would make sense. He just got out of prison for serving 10 years, and you're like, hey, look, the Department of Corrections says there's no way I could be sending these letters. How? And it wasn't like a handful of letters. It was like they made it sound like it was like 900 letters. It was like a ton of letters that happened while he was in prison. It wasn't just a handful. Like I would get if it was like 3 or 4 letters, but it was like a ton of letters. So somehow he was able to smuggle out almost 1,000 letters in over 10 years, and the Department of Corrections never caught any of them.
Wow. Yeah, that's definitely huge red flag. Like FBI definitely need to get some hands on this.
Yeah, you'd think, but I don't think they ever really looked into it. So the next theory I want to talk about is that Paul is actually the guy behind all of it. So there's been extensive research done on the handwriting, and it comes back to Paul quite often. I mean, most of the forensics has pointed at Paul as the possible suspect, but nothing really concrete. Plus, the letters continuing while he's in prison is pretty kind of suspect. The prison warden basically said there's absolutely no way he could be sending these letters while he's behind bars. However, there is a suggestion that maybe he created these letters in bulk and they were then sent by someone else while he was in prison. But again, it wasn't just a few letters. It was a ton of letters that continued for 10 years while he was in prison, and they stopped when he was released. So 48 Hours had a forensic specialist on, and she swears that it has to be Paul based on the samples that she has. So she basically says she's 100% confident that they match, and that if she were to take the stand, she would have no problem swearing on the Bible that letters samples that she had from Paul matched the letters that people were receiving in the town of Circleville. So really the strongest evidence for it being Paul is the handwriting forensics, because other than the gun belonging to him, there's nothing else that really ties him to the booby trap. And he had a pretty strong alibi. He was having repairs done to his house, and the worker said he was there pretty much the whole time. And there are no fingerprints on the case or on the gun. And the way they made it sound, he was extremely compliant during the entire investigation because he was pretty confident that he was innocent. I mean, we didn't talk about this earlier, but he walked Radcliffe through his house. He showed him where his gun normally is stored, all this stuff. And it really just comes back to the handwriting matching up. That's the only thing that really implicates Paul. So the last theory, and this is kind of my own theory, I guess it's a hybrid. So I was thinking about this. Why not both Karen and Paul? So what if they were in on it together? Like they both knew the Gillespies really well. What if they uncovered the affair and together just kind of began sending these letters? It would explain their intimate knowledge of the family. It would explain how the letters could come out in such bulk and how they could continue while Paul was behind bars. And you might think, well, why wouldn't Paul say anything about this? It's implied that he did implicate her in the setup with the attempted murder, but maybe he didn't want to connect himself to the letters as well. So if I was thinking about this, and if he was involved, maybe he's not going to imply that she was helping him with the letters because he doesn't want to implicate himself. And so if they were writing them together and sending them out, they could easily be a part of it. I mean, Ron's death could have created like a wedge between them and their eventual divorce. Like, what if Paul took it too far and ran him off the road? So he was Karen's brother after all. What if they just kind of went too far? So why did Mark kill himself? What did he know? Could he have been holding the secret all along? They claim that Paul told someone he thought it was Mark that stole the gun, but he didn't want to implicate his own son, so he just decided, okay, I'm going to take the fall. I think it's my son, but I'm not going to implicate him. So that also kind of makes you wonder, like, how much of this was known of in the family? What if they were in on this together? The other part of this is that when Mary and Massey came out that they were actually together, it said that this made Paul like really mad. And this is when the signs started popping up along the road. It was at this time they were going through divorce. And so maybe he was putting up the signs, and then Karen booby trapped one with his gun to get him out of the way for the divorce. It could easily all come together like they were doing this together. Paul was upset. Karen took advantage of the situation to get one up on the divorce. Okay, that was like a lot of speculation, and I really don't like to do that. But at the same time, I'm thinking, okay, we have these theories of like maybe it was Paul, maybe it was Karen, and I'm sitting over here thinking maybe it's more of like a gray area, and they were both a part of it.
See, I don't know. Like, it's hard to think that both of them are part of it because, I mean, this was Karen's brother. Your own brother is dead. I mean, I guess that could kind of start creating that wedge for the divorce, maybe. But why would you put them through that much pain? Why would you tell your brother that you're going to kill him if, he doesn't come out with the affair? Like, you're not going to go to your brother and say, "Hey, I'm going to kill your kids if you don't come out about this affair," right?
Yeah, that seems extreme. It does seem extreme. Yeah. It is a weird situation.
There's people out there that can copy handwriting really, really well. And I mean, this was 1970s.
Even today though, there's been forensic analysts that have looked at the handwriting and they implicate Paul.
I wonder if he's got like multiple personalities.
You know, it's funny you say that because 48 hours had a profiler on that went through the letters and read through them, and she specifically talks about how the letters are written in such a way that the person seems to have multiple personalities or is like deranged in some way and has compassion in some places but like extreme emotions in others, and they specifically mention multiple personalities. But the problem is that everyone that knows Paul, the way they talk about him is that he is like this super nice guy. He would never hurt a fly. He's the greatest thing ever. You would assume if someone was that deranged and had multiple personalities, that someone in Paul's life would know that. But that's never talked about. That's never implicated by anybody. So at this point, let's ask. So we're at the end here. What is your thought? Like, what do you think happened?
I'm honestly gonna go with kind of a two-parter here. I do want to say that Paul might have some multiple personality disorder going on. Obviously, if he's the one that wrote these letters, it's very possible that he, was in on it to begin with. But I definitely think a second person was in on it because, all these letters for 10 years while he was in prison is a huge red flag that, there had to be somebody else with it. Like, and I don't think it was Karen. I couldn't tell you who. Maybe Paul was having an affair with somebody or something, and they were both doing it together, like writing these letters and everything. That makes more sense. And they're trying to like point the sheriff out and trying to get everyone to like see what's going on in this town. I think Paul and somebody else. I think somebody never got caught for this.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think so. For me, I don't think it was just, if it was Paul, I don't think it was just Paul. I think he had his hand in some of this to some extent, but there had to be somebody else. For me, there has to be someone else. And I almost think it was Karen. Honestly, I almost think it was them two together doing this. And then the divorce happened, some crazy stuff happened, and they kind of implicate each other, but never come right out and say, he never comes right out and says that his wife. I don't know. It's just such a weird case. And it's really hard because no one knows. For me, I personally feel like I think Paul was framed with the whole booby trap thing, but it also, part of me leans in on, I think Paul was writing some of the letters, at least. I'm in between a little bit, but I don't think Paul did the booby trap. I think he was framed for that, but I do feel like he was involved in the letter writing.
Modern day, this would have been solved so quickly, like with cameras and stuff.
Yeah, with cameras, probably.
Well, I mean, you have like security cameras on your front door. Like, if you don't have a security camera on your front door, somebody else next door does.
Yeah,
You know?
true. And like cell phone pings and things like that. Yeah.
Yeah, this would have been solved really quickly in modern day. But, obviously back then you didn't have that.
It is pretty wild. And this is like, again, this is one of our unsolved mystery episodes. So these are always really interesting because you always kind of just get left hanging. You don't really know what happened. At least with like a paranormal episode or like a extraterrestrial episode, you have something that you can say, okay, this is what they're saying happened. What this is like, you just kind of end with, we don't really know. No one knows who it is, but we think it's this.
The most annoying thing, we don't know.
I know, I know, and we decided to keep this in our cycle, in our rotation, unsolved mystery. But I love a good unsolved mystery though too. It's kind of fun.
Yeah, it is. It's always interesting because I feel like we also kind of, just like I'm sure everybody else that talks about this or has talked about this before, everyone I'm sure brings up something that no one else has thought about.
Yeah, you assume that as people look through this, they come up with their own speculation.
I would love to read this 164 pages that Paul sent to the FBI.
I'm going to add it to the show notes. Go ahead and read it if you like. I don't know. It felt like it was kind of repeating itself a little bit. You can go ahead and read it. It's in the show notes. But all that said, thanks again, everyone, for listening to our 10th episode of The Anecdotalist. So, our next episode is a ghost episode. So, be ready to be scared. But as always, we're not going to get super scary, but it will be fun. So, if you enjoyed our show, please make sure to subscribe and leave us a review. We're still growing. We're still figuring this out as much as we've done. I mean, the fact that we've done 10 episodes is crazy, but we're still in that early phase. So, please share and subscribe, all the things that people typically ask at the end of these. And so, again, thanks for listening to The Anecdotalist.